Good morning, and welcome to the Global Energy Institute's EnergyInnovates. This series convenes a variety of experts to discuss the innovation that is driving America's energy future. And let me start by thanking the sponsor of EnergyInnovates, Siemens Energy. Today, we will discuss alternative fuels and vehicles. We'll hear from both the administration and the business community to examine how we continue American leadership in technology innovation and emission reduction. Our speakers will highlight opportunities for greater deployment of alternative vehicles and fuels, challenges to adoption, and both the need and opportunities for infrastructure build-out. To get started, I'd like to welcome Kelly Speaks Backman, Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the Department of Energy, or EERE. Kelly, thank you for joining us today. So among the major economic sectors, transportation represents the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, comprising about 30% of economy-wide emissions. The Biden administration has made tackling this a focal point of its climate strategy, and your office plays a leading role in this effort, particularly with respect to technology and innovation. So to start, I'd just like to ask you to take a few minutes and provide an overview of the work that your office is undertaking on transportation-related emissions, and perhaps point out some of the highlights of the president's budget that was released last week.
Thank you so much for having me, for inviting me, Marty. I'm really excited to be here today to share our vision for a decarbonized transportation sector. President Biden's clean energy goals put America on an irreversible path to achieving a 100% clean energy economy with net zero emissions no later than 2050. And our mission in EERE is really to drive the research, development, the demonstration and deployment of innovative technologies, systems, and practices that will help us transition to this clean energy economy, and also to ensure that this clean energy economy benefits all Americans. To make this transition, EERE is conducting research, development, demonstrations, and deployments to decarbonize sectors that are major contributors to the country's greenhouse gas profile. One of our programmatic priorities, it really is to decarbonize the transportation sector across all modes. So that includes air, sea, rail, and road. Our goals include accelerating the sales of new light-duty vehicles, electric vehicles, meeting the nation's sustainable aviation fuel needs, and enabling commercially viable hydrogen fuel cell for long-haul heavy-duty trucks and across other modes of transportation. Specific to EVs, we really need to make this more affordable by reducing the cost of EV batteries, by reducing the use of critical materials, and by recycling batteries. 40% of future batteries, critical materials for future batteries could come from recycled batteries. And we believe that EVs can reach cost parity with gasoline cars by 2028, and maybe even sooner if we put our minds to it for some of the high mileage trucks. We also support the national build-out of EV infrastructure within EERE. The president's goal to deploy 500,000 new public charging points by 2030 is a great start. Our work will also be driven by 4 cross-cutting principles, and they include ensuring environmental and energy justice, promoting diversity in STEM, accelerating workforce development, and expanding state and local partnerships. And so, as you can see, we have a lot of work to do to transition to this clean energy economy, and we can't do it all alone. This is an all-hands-on-deck sprint for us, and we really look forward to working with both new and existing partners, because we believe that together we can accelerate this progress that's so critical to securing our clean energy future.
Great. Well, thank you, Kelly. And you touched on a lot of great issues for us to follow up on. So let me start with the critical materials and critical minerals.
Sure.
We kind of want to elaborate there a bit. You know, of course, critical minerals are needed for both EVs and other clean energy technologies. EV and critical mineral supply chains face a lot of different vulnerabilities. So addressing just a single area, such as cobalt or lithium, doesn't necessarily solve the whole problem. So I wonder if you could elaborate on how DOE is prioritizing its approach to that problem, and what are some of the most promising areas of research?
Yes, well, thanks for the question. We're working across many offices within EERE and across Department of Energy, to be frank with you, through our advanced manufacturing office, where we really work not only to improve the efficiency, but also to improve the the carbon footprint of our work through AMO. We also coordinate through the fossil office, seeing where we can get, for example, coal mining tails to be able to recycle and to pull out the critical materials that are so important. And we're looking to try to do all of this at lower and lower costs. So a lot of our research and development work goes into how we can reduce the costs of such recycling and pulling from existing resources. And a lot of the demonstration and deployment side is really making sure that we can scale this up to a level that's going to be important if we're going to be decarbonizing the entire economy.
Great. Well, kind of related to that, of course, the president issued the executive order in February calling for the agency to issue a report assessing supply chain vulnerabilities associated with electric vehicle battery supply chains and many others.
Yes.
Chamber members are very interested in the effort, and we filed comments with the department making recommendations. But it's my understanding the report should be coming out soon. So asking if you can give us any kind of a preview or a sense of what the agency has found and plans to coordinate with other agencies to tackle that challenge.
Well, I can tell you we are looking to reduce the use of critical materials. We are looking to recycle what we already have in the cycling of manufacturing. And I can tell you that the report is coming out very soon.
Great. And anything on there with regard to domestic production of critical minerals?
Absolutely. And so domestic production really is an area where we need to make sure that if we are going to be producing these critical materials and mining these critical materials, that we're doing so sustainably and cost effectively. And so that's really the focus that we have for what we need to use. Let's reduce what we need to use, but when we need it, making sure that we're doing this sustainably and cost effectively is going to be an important element. And so that's where we're focusing our future work at Department of Energy. Okay,
great. Well, switching topics a bit, we know that light duty passenger vehicles have gotten a lot of attention with regard to electric vehicles, but we know there's a great deal of private sector work going on to address emissions from medium and heavy duty trucking as well, and we'll hear more about that later in the panel with Cummins and UPS. As I understand it, DOE's budget request calls for increased support for demonstration efforts to transition medium and heavy trucks to electrified platforms, improve efficiency of the entire freight system. So again, just like to ask if you can elaborate on that priority and DOE's plans for those demonstration projects.
Sure. Part of what we are doing, and this is really just the beginning of a conversation with industry, really, to make sure that we're developing and designing these demonstration and deployment projects correctly. But we're looking at the potential for heavy duty, medium and heavy duty trucks, but or transportation generally. Not only in electric vehicle, I do want to add that we're also looking at bringing down the costs and building infrastructure for hydrogen and the use of hydrogen, especially for the long haul trucking opportunities. We have already reduced on the hydrogen side fuel cell costs by 60% since 2006. We've quadrupled the durability. We've reduced electrolyzer costs by about 80% since 2002. We have done a lot of work, but now we need to scale that up as well. So there is work in our and budget provided for electrification of that medium and heavy duty vehicles. But I will also say that hydrogen will play a big role also in that budget that you saw coming out as well.
Okay, great. Well, don't be surprised if we see a session on hydrogen technology and EnergyInnovates in the future. So,
yeah.
And again, obviously, we'll hear more from our panelists on what's going on in that space on the medium and heavy duty. You mentioned also in your comments about the president's goal of deploying 500,000 charging stations across the country. So give you a chance just to elaborate on that too, on what does the plan look like, the time period, how are sites being selected, and in coordination with state and local governments and the private sector to achieve that objective.
Sure, and you mentioned state and local governments, and that's going to be really critical. Not just, I'll tell you the name of the game for deploying these 500,000 chargers as a start to what we need for and electric vehicle infrastructure is really coordination and cooperation. So it's not just with the state and locals, but also you'll see it through the budget and responsibilities. Sorry about my dog back there. You'll see through the budget and responsibilities, there's a lot of coordination that has to happen across federal government as well. So that means with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Commerce, we're really making sure that we're opening doors and making sure that we're coordinated well. With respect to state and local coordination, there is of course the work that we're doing in the Vehicle Technologies Office within EERE, but also if you think about it, there's the state energy programs, and so we're looking at how we're going to be coordinating across that office that gets dollars, and really making sure that the scope of the work that is going through the state energy programs in the ability to for technical assistance, for dollars for deployment, of getting that money to the state and local governments so that they can most strategically plan out the infrastructure location.
Okay, great, thank you. I did want to ask as well, you mentioned in your opening remarks, and of course we've heard this from all agencies, since the president said it is an all of government approach on environmental justice and equity. And I wonder if you just couldn't take a few minutes to describe how your office and how the agency is addressing that in relation to these programs.
Yeah. Thank you. That is just such an important aspect of what we're doing, and what we're looking at is really for our 4 cross-cutting principles are making sure that energy and environmental justice is put forth. The president put forth a goal of 40%, Justice 40 initiative, if you will, where we're actually even revising the way that we measure our success, making sure that 40% of the benefits of all of the work that we do in EERE reaches disadvantaged communities. And that's not necessarily all in to whom we give the money, but to whom the projects are benefiting. What communities are we going in? As I said earlier, we're looking at sectors rather than just specific technologies. And so you'll see a lot more work from us on really gathering input from communities so that we can make sure to design these funding opportunities so that they can best benefit these disadvantaged communities. Also, we're looking at promoting diversity in STEM, and that also goes towards energy and environmental justice, making sure that we're bringing more diverse folks into Department of Energy, but also we're holding the funding recipients accountable for their diversity plans, for their environmental and energy justice, and we're using that in our consideration of actually whom we're funding. So I hope that helps a little bit.
No, that's very helpful, and I appreciate you addressing that. I think what I'll do now is I'll transition and ask some of the audience questions that we've been getting during our conversation here.
Sure.
And one of them was specific to alcohol fuels, 100% alcohol. I just wonder whether you might expand that to the kind of the biofuels and how your office is looking at that as an opportunity as well. Absolutely,
biofuels are a really exciting area. Especially when it comes to job creation, when it comes to supporting rural economies and spurring innovation. We offer low carbon alternative liquid fuel research and development, but now it's time for us to look at scaling that up, especially as it relates to heavy duty long haul vehicles, when it comes to aviation and when it comes to marine applications. We think that we can offer this, we can move this from the lab into the market in terms of demonstration projects and ultimately deployment projects. Just last April, I can't believe that's 2 months ago already. Time is flying here at DOE, but our Bioenergy Technology Office released a funding opportunity of about $61 million plus a little bit, focused on developing these technologies that are going to convert domestic biomass and other waste resources into low carbon biofuels and bioproducts.
Great. Well, thank you. So going back a little bit, there was a question about hydrogen and fuel cells, and just I don't know if there's anything more you can expand on as far as the focus of your office in hydrogen technology and hydrogen fuel cells.
Well, as you can imagine, hydrogen adds value to a lot of different sectors. So it's not just transportation, but also if you have it in a fuel cell, you can produce electricity and heat for homes and buildings. It can serve as energy storage for allowing for a higher penetration of renewables onto the grid, which is also one of our priorities there. It can be actually exported to markets that are looking for carbon-free energy and who have like really quite high cost of fossil fuel energy and are looking for potential imports. One of the things that we're doing is, or I should say some of the things we're doing is, of course, continuing the research to reduce costs further, but also ramping up demonstration and deployments. So one of our flagship initiatives is H2 at scale. That works to enable large-scale, affordable hydrogen production, hydrogen storage, and hydrogen utilization across these different sectors of the economy. We're hoping that our work, well, at least the vision of this H2 at scale, is that it can integrate different sectors using hydrogen and scale up that volume, which will then reduce the cost for the end user. So you'll hear more of that from us in the coming weeks for sure.
Great. Another audience question had to do with it is we see increased demand, electricity demand for, with greater deployment of EVs. Does your office or the agency see a growing role for nuclear technology, to help on the decarbonization and meeting that greater demand?
Well, I would say Katie Huff is probably the best person to talk to the upgrades of nuclear, but I can tell you, as we're looking at fuel cell technologies, we are absolutely, and looking at hydrogen, we are absolutely coordinating with the nuclear office to make sure that we are looking across our various offices to make sure that we're not duplicating, but in fact augmenting each other's research and development and ultimately the deployment.
Excellent. Well, to that, and thank you for giving information on one of your colleagues. That was another one of the questions, frankly, that if folks are interested in alternative vehicles and fuels, who are the different offices within the department, obviously yours, that people should be in touch with?
Well, certainly Katie Huff is running the nuclear office for us. Office of Electricity is involved as well. So I'm telling you that like one point of contact is not necessarily where you're going to, where the only area where you will be collaborated with. We're really trying to make sure that we are much more open across our offices. So I speak to Pat Hoffman quite a bit on a number of items, including really what we need for transmission for build out of renewables, but also how energy storage plays, because as many of you know, energy storage is not necessarily a generation source. It can also be a transmission and a distribution resource. And so many of these areas of our offices are working to collaborate, and including, I would say, the Office of CSER, where they're working to help stem the threat of cybersecurity challenges that we have with the oncoming deployment of a lot of these technologies that are coming online today.
Great. Well, I think what may end up being our last question, but from the audience was asking that, what advice would you give for state and local governments or private companies that are developing solutions in the EV space or in the supply chain, and to connect with federal dollars or through different DOE's various programs and offices?
Oh my gosh, there's so much opportunity. There is, so Michael Barabé, he is the Deputy Assistant Secretary in charge of Sustainable Transportation. And so he oversees the Vehicle Technologies Office, the Bioenergy Office, and the Hydrogen Office. But also there's the state energy programs, which are within the EE pillar or the energy efficiency pillar, and the acting deputy assistant secretary for that is Ana Maria Garcia, and she is a really great resource for all things energy efficiency, but also she oversees in her pillar the programmings and the funding opportunities that go straight to the states. You'll see in the fiscal year 2022 budget that certainly there are formula budgets that are open for states to design as they will, but there's also some new opportunities as well. So I encourage y'all to take a look at that area of the fiscal year 2022 budget.
Great. Well, so my last question is actually going to be, can you tell us what your dog's name is and what kind of dog it is?
I'm sorry. Moose.
Oh, please don't apologize. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of fans.
He's hilarious. So his name is Moose, like the chocolate, not the animal.
Okay.
And he's lazy, but he's also needy. So he's always sitting behind me, and sometimes he pops his head up. So thank you for your patience.
Of course. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you. I know on behalf of all of our viewers too, we really appreciate the information you provided, and we can make some real headway here.
I really look forward to working with you in the coming years. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
I'm Dan Byers with the Chamber's Global Energy Institute. For our next segment, we're going to focus in on light-duty cars and trucks, the passenger vehicles that we all drive every day, and look at the incredible amount of innovation that's taking place, as well as the robust policy discussion that is ramping up. And so we're delighted that joining us to break it all down is Julia Riege with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. They represent the manufacturers producing nearly 99% of new cars and light trucks sold in the U.S., as well as a number of the original equipment manufacturers. So Julia, welcome and thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. I'm really happy to be here and join you today. You took some of my original opening remarks, and that's great. Thanks so much for setting us up. So maybe I'll start off by saying Auto Innovators and our members, as we work together and strive for cleaner, safer, and smarter transportation for all, we also recognize that our industry is facing some of the most significant and transformative changes that we will ever undergo. This is including electrification as well as advanced safety. Now, certainly today I'll focus on the environmental side, and I'll take a few minutes to cover some of the auto industry's progress to date, as well as where we are going. Progress has been significant with our sector. Cars today are cleaner than ever before. Light-duty vehicles emit near zero tailpipe emissions and are 99% cleaner than they were in the 1960s. Further, since 2004, vehicles have become 30% more fuel efficient, while also increasing performance, durability, and acceleration, which are key purchasing factors for our customers. This means customers can drive further on a single tank of gas and get more value from their vehicles. This is good for the environment and the customer. Yet, new vehicle sales today in the US are comprised of about 98% petroleum-fueled vehicles. And consumer adoption of EVs remains low across the US at about 2% of new vehicle sales, or about 1/4 point of the nearly 290 million light-duty vehicles in the US. So there remains much opportunity to continue our track record of progress, and this includes ongoing efforts to increase fuel economy and reduce tailpipe emissions, the $250 billion that will be spent on electrification through 2023, and an expected 130 EV models by 2026, up from the 50 EV models today. And when I talk about EVs, I do mean plug-in hybrids, battery electric, and fuel cell electric vehicles. So where are we going? Automakers are committed to achieving a net zero carbon future for transportation, and the policies being developed here in Washington and in states across the country will be influential in how and when net zero carbon and vehicle electrification are achieved. For instance, the state of California and several other states as well have set goals to accelerate EV sales. The California Air Resources Board is starting its process to develop regulations to achieve 100% EV sales in the next 15 years. CARB's initial plans are that by 2026, 1 in 4 vehicle sales must be an EV. By 2029, 1 in 2. By 2031, 3 out of 4. And of course, 100% by 2035. This will require a substantial undertaking, even in a state like California, where EV sales are about 8% and outpace any other states. And this is due in part to the fact that California has spent several $billions on preparing its EV market. So careful consideration is needed on policies to grow and enhance all EV markets. At the same time, there's increasing federal focus on electrification, driven in part by some of our observations of what's happening in the policy world. So first, climate change is being listed as a top priority. The opportunity for reducing greenhouse gas emissions is top of mind, with the president directing action to revise near-term greenhouse gas and fuel economy regulations. And 2030 and 2050 global climate goals are driving longer-term action. Second, the US auto manufacturing sector is important. With 14 automakers operating 50 manufacturing facilities across 14 US states, these assembly plants and their supply chains must prepare for the EV transition. This is critical to increasing EVs in the US, maintaining good paying US auto jobs, and promoting US competitiveness. And finally, we should be investing in our future. The administration's provided a view that includes rebuilding roads and bridges, modernizing the grid, supporting the transition to electrification, focusing on environmental equity, and making sure the US workforce has the skills and expertise to support the transition. Recognizing the transition to EVs will not occur overnight, and the time to prepare is now. Auto innovators, along with the Motor Equipment Manufacturers Association and the UAW, called for a bold and comprehensive strategy to support the president's vision. We've highlighted 3 key areas where sustained governmental support for EVs is needed: consumers, infrastructure, and innovation, manufacturing, and the supply chain. These supportive measures are critical to ensuring the necessary conditions for success for electric vehicles through a robust and evolving manufacturing sector, supply chain resiliency, increasing availability of charging and hydrogen fueling stations, and ultimately customer adoption of EVs. And these investments by federal and state governments will complement automaker investments to help grow the EV market in the coming years. There's much more to be said about any of these areas, but in the interest of time, I'll just leave you with 3 points. The auto industry has a long history of innovation and progress and is committed to ongoing improvements, including expanding vehicle electrification. Second, the auto industry is making significant investments in EV technologies, and policies supporting consumers, infrastructure, and manufacturing are needed to provide the necessary conditions for success. And finally, the transition to electrification is a monumental task that will take a bold and comprehensive federal strategy along with state to ensure the US is a leader in the next generation of clean transportation innovation.
Great. Thank you for that very detailed overview. You talked a little bit about the consumer-related challenges, and it's clear that awareness of electric vehicles is increasing. I think back to the Super Bowl ad, the General Motors Super Bowl ad with Will Ferrell and President Biden zipping around in the electric Ford 150 a couple of weeks ago. So there's good awareness, but there's still some challenges in terms of maybe comfort level on behalf of consumers. What are the challenges? How's the industry looking to increase comfort level? Is it range anxiety, price points, charging situation? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important just to say that ultimately the success of electric vehicles all comes back to the consumer and the adoption and the willingness to go electric. So for our association and our member companies, we're really focused on what are those necessary conditions for success that we need in the US to make EVs successful. And if you take it from a consumer perspective, all of those elements really fit into a single term of convenience parity. And so often we talk about cost parity, we talk about range anxiety, but the reality, both of those items fit into this overall viewpoint of whether or not a customer views an electric vehicle as a convenient choice. And so when we look at efforts at the federal level that will help set these conditions for success, we're really focused on making sure we have enough available and low-cost charging to infrastructure. That helps address range anxiety and make sure that customers know they can go where they need to go in their electric vehicle. We look at aspects directly aimed at cost parity, putting R&D into the batteries and the supply chain to make sure that we can provide vehicles at a price and that all customers can afford. And then ultimately, we are also focused on the manufacturing side because as we increase demand and adoption in the US, we also need to be able to supply the vehicles and support the workforce here that has so long been focused on internal combustion engines.
Thanks. That's a handful for the industry to tackle, and so a lot going on there. We have time, I think, for maybe one more question. I'm going to keep us on time. And Marty and Kelly touched on this a little bit, and it's top of mind. We know for a lot of our members in several industries, and that is critical materials. And I'll just plug on later this month, we're going to have a webinar session that will be entirely focused on critical materials. But if you could maybe just in a minute or so comment on what the key concerns are with respect to EV supply chains and what the industry might be looking for from DOE and the rest of the administration as they try to tackle this issue.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't ask me about a dog because I don't have a dog, so I can't answer that question. But the critical mineral piece is really critical to the ability to expand EVs in the US. And it's not just having access to available supplies at a cost-effective basis that are readily available, but it's also making sure that we have the capabilities in the US to process those minerals, to have the facilities in place to manufacture the batteries, and then also have processes in place that look at end of life. And I think Kelly had touched on the recyclability of batteries and the ability to reclaim many of those minerals. And that's really important to our sector as we look at drastically increasing the number of EVs and therefore batteries in the US as well. So from our point of view, it's making sure that we have resiliency throughout the full supply chain, everything from the critical minerals to the end of life.
Fantastic. Well, Julia, thank you so much. That's all the time we have right now. We're going to move on to our next panel, but appreciate you joining us and sharing your insights.
Thanks so much.
Good morning. And now we turn to a diverse and distinguished panel representing the manufacturers and users of exciting new alternative vehicles, propulsion, and fuels. First, I'd like to welcome Ann Oglesby, the Vice President for Energy Research and Innovation at Phillips 66. Welcome, Ann.
Good morning.
Good morning. As one of the largest fuel producers in the world, Phillips 66 is at the center of the discussion around lowering greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. And as lead for your research and innovation program, you are the tip of the spear. Could you give us a quick overview of how Phillips 66 is leading on innovation and emissions reductions in the fuel sector?
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for the Chamber for inviting me today. I thought I would provide a few examples of what Phillips 66 is doing in response to the world's growing appetite for energy, and importantly, providing services that are increasingly customized and enabled by the digital world. In other words, how is a century-old energy company adapting to a market that demands more, cleaner, affordable, and on-demand energy? At Phillips 66, we believe in the "and" world. This means we must continue to supply hydrocarbon fuels for decades, transportation fuels, and importantly, the building block materials for the majority of manufactured and consumer goods. Even the recently released IEA net zero case, one of the most aggressive out there, has a base load of fossil fuels in 2050. The "and" means we need these conventional fuels and other sources of energy as well. There's no silver bullet, hence innovation and cooperation are the key. We're working to make conventional crude oil and natural gas-based energy value chains even more sustainable. And there's that word again. We're working on new solutions such as renewable fuels, fuel cells, solar, batteries, and carbon capture and sequestration. So let me give you a few examples. Energy expenditures are typically 40% of a refinery's operating expenses. So we're working on novel ways to optimize our heat management systems to reduce our own energy consumption in making fuels. We have ongoing research in air emissions modeling and water conservation. And last year, Phillips 66 announced the full conversion of our San Francisco area Rodeo refinery to 100% renewable feedstock. This facility, one of the largest renewable fuel plants in the world, will process 50,000 barrels a day of renewable feedstocks, such as various crop-based oils, animal fats, and greases, into renewable fuels by 2024. We're already processing used cooking oil in our Humber refinery in the UK, and we recently announced a collaboration with Southwest Airlines on sustainable aviation fuel. Earlier this year, we announced the launch of our emerging energy business to focus on growing profitable businesses in the energy transition space. We're already participating in many energy transition markets, including supplying synthetic graphite for anodes in lithium-ion batteries, demonstration projects for hydrogen fueling for medium and heavy-duty trucking in Europe, and a line of lubricants called eShield for electric vehicles that provide thermal and conductive properties required for EVs to run cool and longer between charging. Finally, let me make just one comment about the complexity of this challenge. Our company has had an R&D group since our founding at the turn of the 20th century, and now in the 21st century, we continue to have scientists and engineering working on exciting new ideas. But you know, some of those ideas have been around for a really long time. They just haven't made it over the hump of commercial viability despite decades of work. In the team that I lead, Energy Research and Innovation, we're working on things like solid oxide fuel cells, the reversible fuel cell to produce hydrogen, sodium ion and next generation lithium ion batteries, organic photovoltaics, etc. The good news is powerful new digital tools, as well as advancements in material development, are bringing these new ideas closer to reality. But we need a level playing field for innovation that incentivizes both startups, academia, and larger companies to invest in R&D. We need government to enable and fund R&D for breakthrough pre-commercial technologies and to encourage partnerships across sectors to bring sustainable energy solutions forward. And we need robust and consistent life cycle analysis methodologies and cost transparency so consumers can make smart choices. The scale of the world's energy appetite is massive, so transitioning to new platforms will take cooperation across the full ecosystem.
Well, thank you, Ann. And I look forward to diving into that a little bit later. And next, we have Amy Davis, the president of the New Power segment at Cummins. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, hydrogen is generating a lot of excitement, which we've heard in the two previous panels. And Cummins has been positioning itself as a leader in this space, both in terms of producing the fuel, but also in end-use applications, particularly heavy-duty trucking. Can you share an overview of why Cummins sees this as a growth area and provide a little bit on your investments in technology development with respect to hydrogen?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, first of all, Cummins is a global technology leader, and we've long been participating in heavy industry as a power producer in technologies like diesel and natural gas, and we're most known for that. But since our founding, we've been really at the forefront of social justice, environmental sustainability, and technology development. We are one of the first in our industry, actually, to publish a sustainability report. And we've long been an advocate for embracing more stringent emissions and diesel emission standards over the past decades. And so as we kind of come into this environmental crisis, Cummins feels it's our responsibility to really be a leader in the technology innovation that will transform to a zero emission, zero carbon power source for all of our customer bases and in the industries that we participate. And so in that regard, we've long been investing in different kinds of technologies. In one of the previous panels, there was some discussion on alternative fuels. And we made some significant investments over the past 5 to 7 years in battery technologies and hydrogen technologies to try to really start leading the way in the technology innovation that we would need to have to help transform our customer base to zero carbon. And so over the past couple of years, we have done a bunch of pilot projects in transportation sectors like rail. We have some of the first rail fuel cell systems operating in Europe. We have multiple truck and bus applications running in North America and in the US to try to really play with the technology, innovate, and start to get the learnings that we need to drive this down the cost curve. Because I think we really believe at Cummins that hydrogen is more than likely going to be the best solution for heavy duty applications and heavy duty trucking. And so the more we can get products out there, learn from them, hopefully we can drive the innovation that'll drive it down the cost curve, because it really is going to have to get more cost competitive to be commercially viable for our heavy duty trucking partners.
Thank you, Amy. Hydrogen is fascinating, and we'll get more into that later. And now we turn to Tom Jensen, Senior Vice President for Transportation Policy at UPS. Good morning, Tom. Good to see you again.
Hey, Chris, thank you. And we appreciate what Amy and Ann had to share because, frankly, UPS agrees with a lot of what they said, but good to be here.
Well, that's a good segue, and that's why we love to have the full value chain of the discussion topics. And UPS is one of the largest fuel consumers in the world, but the scale required to meet your climate commitments to transition your fleets presents some significant challenges. Heavy duty and light duty trucks have unique issues.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit about your emissions reductions goals and your long-term vision for achieving them?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So very important to the company, obviously. You know, UPS is in business since 1907, and this is bread and butter, sweet spot stuff for us moving forward. All the major stakeholders we deal with are encouraging the company to get greener and cleaner, and we're completely committed to that. So, in fact, we're going to have a fairly large announcement in the not too distant future. I don't want to tease it in June. We are in June, but in a week or so, related to where we're going in the future from a net zero perspective. But that being said, we've done a lot of good things with the fleet, and everybody knows UPS that the challenge we have is that we operate in all kinds of geographies, topographies, climates, environments, and we're everywhere. And I think that's important to keep in mind when policymakers and when industry says, you ought to be doing X, you ought to be doing Y. So we're real interested in the medium and heavy duty side of things, of course. Electrification is great, and that's something that has been talked about and written about quite a bit. But UPS clearly at this point, and it's cliche, but it's true. We're in the all of the above kind of category. We anticipate utilizing internal combustion engines for 20 years. So we're not going to go electric tomorrow. We can't get the vehicles. As a quick aside, UPS has an order right now, which is a back order because they're not being produced on time or on schedule, for 10,000 final mile delivery vehicles, or little brown trucks, we call them, package cars. That's coming from a company called Arrival, which is a UK company. And they're going to be great, but they're not being produced. In addition, we made the largest single order of the Tesla tractor trailer, the heavy duty class 8 tractor of 125, the pre-orders of those, and that's behind schedule as well. So we will integrate those electric vehicles into our fleet, but today we're using we've got about worldwide, we've got 10,500 alternative fuel vehicles. And it's everything from compressed natural gas to liquefied natural gas to hybrid electric to propane to hydraulic hybrid. Hydrogen certainly has a future in that role, but we clearly see this as kind of the all of the above approach. And again, that's cliche, but that's true. And we got to make sure or encourage policymakers not to pigeonhole industry into any specific fuel per se, but let's find out what works the best in a variety of conditions and for a variety of customers, what have you. I finished this opening comment by saying this. It's been real interesting in the last 5-10 years to work with a variety of innovators, chamber members, some non-chamber members, presumably. But we got people coming to us all the time, every week, related to new angles on new sources of energy and how we can utilize and deploy them. And it's really interesting stuff. And we're doing a lot of interesting projects as it relates to that, both on UPS property, not necessarily on the roads, but on property, and then off property in the public domain as well.
Thanks, Tom. Now, turning to you and to Anne, you both have significant focuses on air travel. And the challenges that the aviation sector faces in reducing emissions is quite unique. Starting with you, Anne, how is Phillips 66 tackling aviation emissions?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we just announced a collaboration with Southwest Airlines to really understand what the real life challenges are, but also to create awareness. One of the things that we need is a pathway for certification of the various production methodologies for sustainable aviation fuel. So we're part of the Advanced Biofuels Coalition that is working on the ASTM certification of various production pathways. We also need tax credits to incentivize development of this market. There are quite a few ways to make renewable aviation fuel, but you know, like all of these things, getting all of those certified and validated and ready to go is a tedious and time-consuming process. So I think it's going to require participants along the whole system to work together to find viable ways of bringing renewable aviation fuels to reality.
The regulatory process and certainty is a good point, and hopefully we'll be able to get into that a little bit later. You know, Tom, as you alluded to, I mean, you have thousands of different modes of transportation. Everyone knows about the big brown trucks, but sometimes they forget about the hundreds of aircraft that you have. So what is the UPS path for emissions reductions in the aviation sector?
Well, I would refer back to Anne's statement about a tax credit, legitimate incentive and tax credit related to sustainable aviation fuels. That's going to be critical. You know, as an industry, the industry is working hard to get their arms around it, but the technology is real challenging at present. I mean, frankly, from an SAF or sustainable aviation fuel perspective, things done to date have pretty much been novelties, and there haven't been any kind of full-scale application or deployment. So we that's really kind of the needle mover when we look at transportation emissions. It really is. As much as we've done such a great job on the ground side, the next frontier, so to speak, is on the aviation side and in the air. And we're working with our industry partners, Airlines for America and others, to try to get our arms around it. But we have to help enable the technology to provide a scalable, sustainable aviation fuel. And frankly, we're just quite not there yet.
It's a big scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And the numbers add up real quickly when it relates to aviation.
Now, turning back to you, Amy, in the policy space, hydrogen is generally discussed more often as a generation fuel than a transportation fuel. But hydrogen is unique because of its potential versatility in terms of the myriad of applications. Can you tell us a little bit about the universe of potential customers that might purchase fuel produced by Cummins technology?
Yeah, I mean, first I just wanted to reference Tom's comments because we also see the complexity of many of our customers' broad range of applications. And so we do feel that hydrogen plays a key role, but also the battery electric technologies and natural gas technologies, as he mentioned, all can come together to help fleets transform faster by complementing the technologies across a fleet or a variety of customer applications. Hydrogen in particular helps for many of the transport sectors where weight and range is a problem. So if you think about whether it's a mining truck or a heavy truck, they're hauling things, and usually they want to maximize what they can bring to maximize their total cost of operation. And so one of the challenges in batteries for these kinds of applications is their storage units, essentially. And so they're very heavy and bulky way to store energy. And so hydrogen fuel cells can play a really exciting role in taking the range anxiety out and having a better package so that the customers and the applications that really need to haul a lot and do heavy work don't have to rely on the big battery energy storage, and the fuel cell can complement it. But just to be clear, they're all electric drivetrains. It's just the fuel cell kind of drives the battery or can drive the driveline directly to take away the pressure or the emphasis on the battery. But in addition to that, absolutely, we're seeing hydrogen fuel cells as really interesting for applications such as power generation. I mentioned rail. Even on the utility sector, we're partnering with a lot of utility companies and different developers in the clean energy space in wind and hydro to bring hydrogen technologies like electrolysis and solid oxide, like Ann mentioned, solid oxide fuel cells, which can be heat generators and help do combined heat and power kinds of applications. So it's really quite broad, and for Cummins, it's exciting because we can help a lot of our traditional customers transform their fleets and their applications where there's a lot of complexity, but also we can go into new segments and really help bring our technology offerings to transform to a zero carbon environment.
Lots of potential applications there. Looking at the clock, I think we probably have time for one more. Taking what all three of you have laid out in whole, it's clear that businesses are up to the challenge and are taking very innovative approaches and are committed to achieving the respective goals they have set. Now, you've all mentioned federal policy as a key issue for technology development, but especially deployment. And since we know there are many members of Congress and their staff watching, in addition to our friends in the administration, how can the federal government help you achieve your goals, or maybe more importantly, not inhibit you? Let's start with you, Ann.
Well, I appreciate some of the comments that Kelly made at the beginning about the wide variety of efforts in the government for funding R&D and working collaboratively across the various national laboratories. And we, like most companies, are trying to participate and access all of that. I would say the methodologies for judging the greenhouse gas footprints, as well as other environmental considerations, other emissions, water usage, et cetera, in terms of life cycle analysis, those methodologies need to be consistent so that we're making fair assessments of full value chain, full supply chain impacts of all of these different issues. We could get into specific things on all of the different pathways. Renewable fuels, for example, where we're very active, aggregation of feedstocks is a key issue, and understanding the processing impacts. For example, when you process renewable feedstocks to make fuels, it changes the nature of your water footprint, your et cetera. So I think as the world is charging ahead so fast, we have a century of understanding how the hydrocarbon-based energy world works, and we're just beginning to understand the full life cycle supply chain impacts of these other things. So as the government puts incentives in place, tax credits in place, we also need to have an underlying consistent framework for evaluating these various pathways.
What about you, Amy? You've mentioned price points when it came to hydrogen. What are some of the policies that you're looking at?
I mean, we think three things are really important. I would say infrastructure is going to be important. So even though the end use, I've talked a lot about the end use applications, the infrastructure build out, whether it be in charging or in hydrogen availability and fueling, is important. The R&D, to incentivize the R&D that helps get the cost down in design, as well as deployment. And we think there's a full menu available, tax credits to incentivize hydrogen production, fueling and storage to help decarbonize the grid. We're especially pleased to see a focus on hydrogen in the recent Senate Finance Committee Clean Energy for America Act. that provides tax credits for clean hydrogen production, alternative fuel trucks, and commercial vehicle charging and fueling equipment. This is really important, as well as grant programs that'll help transit agencies and federal fleets close their cost gap, because they have to, at the end of the day, they're a business and they have to make money on their transportation. And so those grants can be absolutely pivotal in helping them seed their fleets and get products in there. Those are just a couple things. I think that the final thing I would say is a build out for an early adopter of the ecosystem, because the way I see hydrogen is it's a whole ecosystem. We have to have the hydrogen production from a clean grid all the way to the fueling stations where fleets need it. And so that ecosystem adoption is really key.
And finally, Tom, the Chamber's transportation guru, as chairman of our Transportation Policy Committee, what are some of the policies as the end user are you looking for?
Well, a little bit redundant, but I think it bears repeating. Tax policy can be a strong catalyst in this area. It really can. For example, natural gas has been critical to us and is a great, what we think is a bridge fuel moving forward. The natural gas tax credit gets caught up in this whole extenders package every year or every other year when Congress goes through their exercise and trying to extend a variety of random tax credits and puts them in a bundle and pushes them out for another year of extension. But that's something we should make permanent. Again, a wonderful bridge fuel moving forward. We've done a lot with RNG and renewables, and as we move to electrification, these bridge fuels are real important. So tax policy on the gas side, on the electric side, a lot's been talked about, of course, and the infrastructure piece as was mentioned earlier as well. I mean, as we build this thing out, people will say to us at UPS, they'll say, hey, you're a big multinational. Why do you need help from a tax policy or infrastructure perspective? And our answer is pretty simple. Our answer is, well, it's not just us. It's our customers, and it's the medium and small size businesses or small trucking fleets. We've got operate over 100,000 vehicles around the country, so that we've got the scale that small companies don't. If we don't incent and move via tax policy as well as legitimate infrastructure investments into these new technologies, it's going to be a very, very slow and rocky transition for the small business. So we're focused on that, as well as a variety of other things, including not saddling businesses with new regulatory mandates and new, troublesome regulatory schemes that impede our ability to innovate. And that's really crucial in this area. We need the ability to innovate, and that flexibility comes with a little bit less regulation, frankly.
And that's a great point to end on, Tom. Ann, Amy, Tom, thank you very much for joining us this morning and helping our viewers see the entire supply chain from fuel production, propulsion, and engine manufacturing all the way to the end user. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to our viewers for joining us today. And again, I want to thank our sponsor, Siemens Energy. Please plan to join us for our next session on June 24th to discuss the critical minerals, critical materials issue and impacts on the supply chain. You heard some of that discussion today of the opportunities and challenges related to critical materials. So we'll have a chance to dive deeper on the 24th. You can find the registration link in the chat box. Thank you again, and look forward to seeing you soon.